that I want to share with you. This conversation was sparked by so much of what was been happening in and around New York and around the world. The idea that anti-Semitism is alive and well is a very scary thing. I honestly thought that my children would be able to just be reminded of the stories of the past and not have their own stories to tell to their own children. But unfortunately, the way in which things in the world have unfolded is that we're seeing a return of atheism. And what we did over the last few weeks is we spoke a little bit about the history of anti-Semitism, where we found it, where it exists, what we can do to understand a little bit better. You could go back to those classes; they're online. What I want to do today is deal with certain issues, like does money have and economic factors, maybe that explains anti-Semitism. Does anti-Semitism come from Jews being labeled as the chosen people? Right? What are other valid, theories of explaining anti-Semitism? Is anti-Semitism related to a religion or a race? Is there any one theory that fully explains the historic phenomenon of anti-Semitism, or is it just, unique to the Jewish people? So, if you ask anyone, or Jewish or not, scholar or layperson, why Jews have been hated so deeply for so long, and you're likely going to be told that people need scapegoats. And since Jews are affluent, right, or that Jews are affluent, is another sad example of anti-Semitism, racism, religious bigotry, and so on and so forth. Or maybe it's anti-Semites are just really sick, meaning you're likely to be given every reason for anti-Semitism, except amazingly that it is a response to anything distinctly Jewish. Now, until recently, and throughout history, Jews have believed that they were hated because Judaism made them different. And Jewish values and laws made things very challenging for them. The historical record, by the way, doesn't agree with that. We believe that that even though Jewish hatred is unique, the very word Jew contains continues to arouse passions, as does other religions or national names. So, for example, before we discuss why we think the alternative explanations for anti-Semitism are at best partial or at worst completely false, let us suggest just why there are so many alternative explanations given for anti-Semitism. Now, this idea is based on the human tendency to avoid responsibility. If the hatred for Jews is unlike other hatred of groups, but it is based on their historical and continuing role as the chosen people, this label puts a massive burden on each Jew. The average person shuns this level of responsibility. I don't want to take that responsibility, and I know certainly you don't want to take that responsibility. So let me mention one clear case that will be done to avoid this particular truth. Anne Frank. Anne Frank, who has become the very symbol of the Holocaust, came from a completely assimilated home. Despite this fact, she was hidden in that famous attic. She came to grasp that the Holocaust as being precisely because of the Jews' unique relationship with God. Now, Broadway did this adaptation of her diary, and I'm going to read a part of this diary adaptation for you. So this is what it says. This is Anne Frank, recognized Jewish. This is it. So, though raised in a secular, this is, imagine Anne Frank and her voice. Though raised in a secular and assimilated home, Anne came to feel during her years of hiding that there were specific Jewish reasons for the suffering she and other Jews were undergoing. On April 11th, 1944, she wrote, "Who has inflicted this upon us? Who has made us Jews different from all other people? Who has allowed us to suffer so terribly up until now? It is God who has made us as we are, but it will be God too, who will rise us up again. Who knows? It might even be our religion from which the world and all the people learn good. And for that reason, and only that reason, do we suffer. We can never just become Netherlanders or just English representatives of any country for that matter. We will always remain Jews. But we want to too. But Anne Frank's beliefs that Judaism was at the root of Jewish hatred and the Jews were different were eliminated in the Broadway version of the Diary of Anne Frank. The authors of Alfred and Franz Hackett, who wrote this Jewish playwright, and these guys are interesting individuals. They basically deleted that passage from the play, right? And even though I believe it was so central to her thinking, the original playwright was written by a guy named Meir Levin, and instead what she wrote was that we're not the only people who have to suffer, sometimes one race, sometimes another. That's not what she said. So what are the theories for anti-Semitism? Let's talk about economic. Now, the economic theory of anti-Semitism postulates that Jews have a tremendous amount of wealth, and with wealth comes power. And this wealth and power arises the envy of all sorts of groups. Hold on a second, just letting somebody in. Okay, this power and wealth, arouses the envy of groups, and this in turn leads to all kinds of resentment. Now, this theory has surfaced in different guises throughout history. One of the ways it became popularized is through the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in 1903, the minutes of the fictional, secret, Zionistic Jewish meeting to plot to conquer the whole entire world, where was viciously a anti-Semitic book created by the Russian secret police. Now, the fictional account provided an excellent excuse for campaigns of persecution against Jews. It influenced the masses to believe the myth that Jews control governments. And we're still living with this unfortunate reality. Do people today still believe that Jews have some mystical, mysterious, financial, organizational advantage over the rest of humanity? You better believe it. We're hearing congresswomen and other members of government today actually saying these things. Now, does jealousy of Jewish affluence explain anti-Semitism? Right? That anti-Semitism has often existed even when Jews were super poor. And affluent groups hated the poor people. So let's look back for a second. Now, consider the universal attitude towards the wealthy. We don't see any sustained historical persecution against wealthy non-Jews. So if haters decide to single out wealthy Jews and ignore wealthy non-Jews, economics cannot be regarded as the cause for hatred. Now, if we remove the element of wealth and power from the Jews, does anti-Semitism vanish? The Jews who lived in shtetls and villages of Poland and Russia during the 17th and 20th centuries were poor and powerless. They were lacking any form of influence whatsoever. Yet, we know they were hated. Often, they were persecuted and subjected to unspeakable, embarrassing torment. There were many occasions where villages were ransacked and their Jewish inhabitants were massacred in cold blood. Under those circumstances, anti-Semitism did not distinguish between rich and poor, between strong and weak, between powerful and powerless, influential and uninfluential. Poor Jews have always been hated equally as rich Jews. So when a Jew meets with a financial success and he gets all this money, it may set the anti-Semites' teeth on edge, but the Jew's success is clearly not what created the anti-Semite. Money, therefore, is not the cause of anti-Semitism. Now, people say that anti-Semitism has been caused by the fact that Jews were moneylenders. Okay, In many societies, Jews were money lenders, and supposedly they extracted their pound of flesh from their non-Jewish, neighbors. But we know the opposite is true. Jews were forced to become money lenders because of the unemployment limitations, which anti-Semitic trends imposed on them, right? These were the rules of the laws of the governments they lent in. They were not allowed to own land. They were not allowed to attend university. They weren't allowed to have common occupations. Money was the only commodity in which they were allowed to deal. So lacking any other option, they became money lenders because that's the only way they could support their families. So we see Jews were not hated because they were money lenders, but rather they were money lenders because they were hated. It's the exact opposite. Now, clearly, the Jewish role as moneylenders increased Gentile hatred for them, right? Because who wants to pay back the guy who's like, collecting interest on my money? But that can't be considered the root cause of anti-Semitism. So if it's not money lending, then maybe it's power. Can power be the cause of anti-Semitism? Okay, now listen to this very carefully. If there's any truth to the notions that Jews control governments, think about that for a moment. The assertion is that Jews control governments. Why couldn't those powerful Jews convince any country to accept the refugees who are struggling to escape the European inferno of the Holocaust? If the world Jews are so powerful and wield so much political influence, surely at least one government would have agreed to take them in as refugees and allow them to stay until the end of the world, the end of the World War, any of the wars, anywhere in history. But that's not what happened, right? There's someone by the name of Rabbi Reuven Ibragimov, and he says that the proof against the theory that Jews control government is that anti-Semitism existed even before Jews had any civil rights. How could we have had power over governments if we couldn't get them to do things to save basic Jews throughout any era in history where governments were used to destroy Jews? So it can't be power. Okay, well, what about the fact that, they're chosen people? Okay. Now, chosenness is undeniably widespread. Okay, several years ago, the University of California conducted a study on anti-Semitism. Non-Jewish Americans were presented with 18 unfavorable statements about Jews and were asked whether they believed any of them. So by far, the most widely held belief among those surveyed, this is 59% believed, that Jews consider themselves to be God's chosen people. Right? Now, I happen to agree with them. I mean, we are. I can't. That's not true. I mean, the way I say it to my students is that as more than we are God's chosen people, we're the choosing people. We chose God. I think that's a healthier way of saying the same thing. So now let's test whether this belief of chosenness is a legitimate cause for anti-Semitism, or whether it's merely some other kind of, excuse for this kind of belief. Now, if Jewish chosenness is in fact the cause of anti-Semitism, then hatred against the Jews should have disappeared when Jews drop the claim that they're chosen, right? In the late 19th century, Jews living in Germany and Austria, they collectively rejected their chosenness, and they chose to assimilate. They chose to adopt their host nation's beliefs. As a matter of fact, the Jewish Ashkenazi Jews in Germany said that Berlin is our Jerusalem. Now, the Gentile society became their social environment of choice. They took out the words Jerusalem and Israel from their prayer books. They completely want to assimilate into German culture. No, we know the answer to that. Tragically, unfortunately, no. Jews in Germany and Austria doesn't really pass the litmus. The Chinese word for China is the center of the earth. This is the reality of every nation. Every nation believes in some level that they are unique. Okay, so then why is it that their idea of chosenness doesn't impact any kind of hatred for those groups of people, right? Americans, they believe that we're a bright, shining light. Christians believe that only Christians go to heaven. Muslims believe that they see themselves as the messenger of God. Yet all the world's people, the Jews with their doctrine of chosenness, they somehow elicit the sharpest of attacks. Now, this is another unique phenomenon known as Jewish hatred, right? So in light of the common tendency of all nations to see themselves as special, the title chosen people can't be the root cause of anti-Semitism, right? People point that this label is the cause for the hostility, like we saw in that study. But unfortunately, that's not the case, right? Now, the Jews do have some special relation with God. I clearly believe that, but their chosenness is simply an indication of their unique responsibility, not their not anything more than that. What about the scapegoat theory? And we'll end with the scapegoat theory. No, we'll do a couple more. The scapegoat theory. So the scapegoat theory is that Jews have been used as scapegoats, right? The problem with the scapegoat theory is that it doesn't explain anti-Semitism. It only explains why, when, or how people use anti-Semitism, not why they're anti-Semitic. It doesn't even answer the question. So why do we, so to begin with, why is it that people hate the Jewish people? What is it about this small group that enables so many people to believe that the most horrible accusations ever leveled against them? What is it? Now, many Jews are hated simply because they're different. They're perceived to be outsiders. Traditionally, Jews have always been dressed somewhat differently. They have different laws and sometimes even different languages. Certainly, this discrimination is what the Chinese experienced in early America and what the French experienced in England, right? The sociologists they basically explain this phenomenon as the dislike of the unlike. Okay, and the theory sounds like a sensible cause for anti-Semitism. Jews have been hated because they're different, period. Throughout history, Jews always kept to themselves. They had their own ethical, cultural, social systems that were very different from their neighbors. Jews always had this fond dream of their return to Zion, to go back to Israel. They were always law-abiding citizens who contributed to their host nations. They went to the war, they went to the army, they went to the battlefield to defend their countries. But their hearts always point to the direction of the promised land of Israel. Now, it's true that throughout history, Jews were the ultimate outsider. But what happened when Jews shed their cultural differences and became a genuine insider? If the outsider theory is correct, then the solution to anti-Semitism should be assimilation. Just have the Jews assimilate and anti-Semitism will disappear or decrease, right? It'll decrease the ratio of Jews being hated. Is that what happens? Unfortunately, no. 18th century, Enlightenment reached Europe, and it gave equal rights to all people regardless of religion. Famous story in December 1789, during a discussion of French National Assembly, in which French Jews were granted equal rights. Okay, you had someone by the name of Count Stanislas de Clement who declared to the Jews as individuals everything, to the Jews as a nation, nothing. To the Jews as individuals, everything. To the Jews as a nation, nothing. That was his famous quote. To the Jews of Europe, so they jumped at the opportunity to attain equality, hoping to get rid of this long, dislike, unlike phenomenon. They shed their foreign cultural religious dress. They shaved off their beards, their peyot. They went to universities. They were able to get into the theaters. They adopted the language, the culture, the style of their non-Jewish neighbors, took on some French culture. They intermarried with them. They purged their prayers of any mention of Zion, and they became more French than the French. Okay, Jews accepted this attitude all over the place. Germany, Jews reformed. Okay, this was all throughout Europe. Jews were leaving their Judaism behind. but they were so very, very, very disappointed. Something called the Dreyfus Affair, in which falsified charges of treason were brought against a Jewish French officer. Okay, this was basically the allegation was that he was a double agent, and it proved that Jews can never be a loyal citizen to their host countries. Afterwards, not too long afterwards, Hitler rose to power, and he pulled the rug from underneath the Jews. There was a sense of security in their assimilation, but the Nazis sent a very strong message to the Jews: we hate you not because you're different, but because you're trying to become like us. We can't allow you to infect our Aryan race with your inferior genes. And this is the first time in history where anti-Semitism became a genetic issue and no longer a religious issue, right? So long as Jews remained as outsiders, right? The outsider theory reflected some degree of logic, but once Jews attempted to become insiders, the outsider theory was completely blown to pieces. So the fact that after assimilation, anti-Semitism continued, even flourished, after their assimilation, doesn't make any rational sense. If people tend to hate those who are different, the other, why would the hatred continue once Jews became far less different? Now, according to Torah, God made a covenant with Abraham and his descendants that they re-accepted at Sinai. Now, if so, no matter how much a Jew tries to escape his responsibility to remain, he's going to be Jewish no matter what. Even if he tries to blend into the surrounding culture, the Jew does remain different no matter what. He's going to be the ultimate other. Now, what I want to do, God willing, next week is could explore how God can use anti-Semitism as a means to keep the Jews from assimilating, to keep their unique mission. Okay, for example, in Yalkut Shimoni, it says that the exile in Egypt, right? Jews attempted to assimilate, right, and therefore God created anti-Semitism to help them maintain their Jewish identity in Mitzrayim. Now, Gentile hatred was always a unique thing, but assimilation didn't stop it. Now, it may not fit our common sense, but it's certainly a historical fact that the period that saw the largest flight of Jews from the Torah culminated in the Holocaust. Though he died before the Holocaust, or Meir Simcha of Dvinsk, the author of the Meshech Chachma, he predicted that the assimilation that was happening throughout Europe would lead to Jewish suffering. He says this in Vayikra. You can look it up in Leviticus 26:44, straight out. He says that there's going to be a storm wind of crying. He says, you're Jewish, and who made you, Jewish is going to be the same person that's going to remind you, no matter what the circumstance you put yourself in, that Judaism will never be taken away from you. Okay? Those Jews who believed that Berlin was Jerusalem, those who had assimilated, were the first ones to see the storm coming. When Theodor Herzl observed the Dreyfus Affair, he gave up on the assimilation of individual Jews into the host country. He realized that that's not a solution to anti-Semitism. His solution was that the Jews be separated, and they were always going to be separate, and therefore they had to go back to their homeland. And this idea led to the modern Zionism movement. All of it's a huge success. But we're going to see when we get to talk about Zionism, right, that didn't really accomplish the end of anti-Semitism. God willing, we'll take on next week the racial theory of anti-Semitism. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them. If anyone wants to see any of the notes, source material, I'm happy to provide them. Otherwise, wishing you an amazing week. God willing, we'll continue the conversation next week. Stay tuned for part 4 of the conversation. Lots of love. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Izzy, you're a champ. Sion, and everyone else. Leah, David, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you guys, God willing, next week. Shavua Tov. Shabbat Shalom.